customers and CHROs and CLOs that I talk to, they are asking me that, Karl, can you tell me from your system, based on other companies in my sector, that what kind of roles that I would need over the next 2 years, right? And what we see that, of course, at an aggregate level, right, it's nothing to do with an individual company without giving away anything about anybody in complete privacy. You can still predict and say that, look, if you are an oil and gas company, you're gonna need, an average of 500 cybersecurity engineers, okay, based on the size of your company. Let's say you're a 20,000 people company, 500 of your 20,000 people must be cybersecurity, right? And now
it's almost getting into the sort of talent planning and organizational planning realm.
Yes,
but driven ultimately from the sort of the demand curve around future skills.
Exactly. And then what happens is, now that creates a sense of urgency, right? Until now, one of the complaints that I used to get from venture capitalists and entrepreneurs was that, hey, being in this learning space is really hard because you're trying to sell to people who have no sense of urgency, right? Your sales cycle can be 1 year, 2 years, because they don't have any kind of a pressure other than some compliance stuff that they have to achieve the deadline for sexual harassment or something. For the rest of the thing, there's no sense of urgency. But well, you know what? If you're a CHRO or a CLO, and you hear that in your size of your company, you need 500 cybersecurity engineers and you only have 50, you're going to now feel a sense of urgency, right?
Somewhat exposed. Can we shift gears a little bit, Karl? Now, I want to talk about your philanthropic work and your philosophy around that. You'd mentioned earlier that you sort of slipped into the conversation that you'd spent some time in the Obama White House as an innovation fellow. What was that role, and how did that come about?
Yeah, so when President Obama took the second term, he realized that there are a lot of problems at the national level, at the federal level, across the country that needs to be solved with technology and big data. And he came up with this new program called Presidential Innovation Fellow, where he said, we're going to bring people from the outside private sector for about a year to work in the White House, in the CTO office. And they will be given this problem statements, which are very large scale, and they'll work for a year on those problems and come back with a solution or even implement it. And you get access to the IT and the tech infrastructure that exists in various departments, so you can practically walk into Commerce Department or State Department and help them in solving the problem. I was given my payment background. I was looking at the whole $65 billion that U.S. aid gives out to foreign countries, and how do we make that more efficient, more effective, because that's literally our taxpayer money, right? It's our money. Yeah. We're giving 65 billion. So I did a number of things, like, we did a lot of big data stuff about kind of analyzing, the effectiveness and the impact analysis of that philanthropy. We created an alliance we launched an alliance called Better Than Cash Alliance. We brought in Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, because they do a lot of great work in financial inclusion, as well as Omidyar Networks and Visa, my former company. I brought them together like a public-private partnership. And we developed a lot of best practices, processes, and policies around electronification of cash, so that you can reduce the middleman, you can reduce corruption, and this $65 billion actually reaches its beneficiary. Otherwise, half the money can go away just in the middleman, and doesn't
for sure
beneficiary. That was the biggest problem statement that kind of I was trying to focus on. But we ended up doing many other interesting projects while we were there.
So you've said in some, when I was doing my research, Karl, you said in a speech that you gave, I think it was a TEDx speech, that wealth creation is not just about money. Can you explain your philosophy on giving back? I mean, you've done work in government administrations, and you've also launched your own philanthropic efforts. How do you feel about that? What's your philosophy on giving back?
Yeah, I feel very strongly that we all have an absolute obligation that everything that we have earned, which even though our ego may tell us that we have earned out of our own hard work, the reality is that we were a beneficiary of somebody else who put in a great system right before
Yeah.
us. If I was not a beneficiary of good education, I was not a beneficiary of the Silicon Valley ecosystem, I would have not done well in my life, right? So I can't attribute any wealth or any success to my own self, but we owe it to the people before us. So then the obligation is that we have to do the same thing for pay it forward. So that's one. And second is that this whole thing that we build any value, it should help create more value for the people in the bottom of the pyramid, because that's where you see the true scalability of any technology or wealth creation. So I've been very focused. I mean, very much passionate about it to try to do that. So I started couple of nonprofits. One is Code for India, trying to help teach coding to underprivileged or what you call like bottom of the pyramid kids, as well as to build certain software for free that helps the foundations to reach that underprivileged. But
Hmm.
and it's very satisfying. I mean, I would say that from an outside world, or it may feel like a selfless activity. I tend to tell my kids actually that anything that you do in philanthropy is actually a very selfish exercise, because you
Hmm.
know you are doing it for your own satisfaction, because the level of fulfillment that you get by doing that is way higher than any other fulfillment you'll get. So think of it as the highest selfish activity.
One last question, if I can, and it's sort of along similar lines. And I ask everybody who comes on the podcast this question, and I wonder if, because I think when you come into philanthropic work, or you come into the learning kind of sphere, there seems to be something special about that work. And I wondered if there was a particular incident or a person or something that inspired you and motivated you to spend at least some of your career time focusing on learning.
Yeah, so although I came into this space from my own personal pain point to solve, and then I saw a much bigger problem. I have always been very passionate about learning and education, because growing up in a pretty lower middle class in a developing country, the only ticket to success was because of education. So the value of education and learning is like ingrained, and it feels that that's the only ticket for mobility for everybody. And so I think for me, the my own personal life experience, that education and learning is such a noble profession. I would put it almost at the same level as doctors, that I look at them as a noble profession, right?
Mm,
Obviously, they have to make a living, and they have to charge the fees for it, but they're doing a lot of good work for people, right, for their health. And so
yeah.
I'm really motivated on a daily basis, when I obviously work does get very stressful, and it is very lot of hard work. But the best inspiration and motivation is that, hey, we are improving and making a real meaningful impact in people's life with learning, because the more they learn, the more we create and cultivate the habit of this lifelong learning and upskilling. We are creating a better future for them, for their communities, and for their country.
Can I ask you one question? And we don't have to include this if you don't think it's appropriate. But uh, you're friends with Satya, and there's a sort of it's a wave of CEOs who had their sort of formative years in India. Do you think there's something special about education in India? When I go there, there's such an attention and focus on education. Is there do you have a point of view on that?
Yeah, well, I mean, there is something different, and I see that because my kids have gone to school and college now. Older one has gone to college here, and I continuously compare to my experience of doing my school and college in India. And I think the big difference that I find is that the schooling and college there is highly intense. It's probably way more intense and more competitive. Now, it's not
Yeah.
always everything has its positive and negative, right? So
Yeah.
the positive is that it builds up people with a tremendous amount of intensity, stamina, and depth, in the sense that you would look at everything very seriously, right? Because
Yeah. Yeah.
you're just trained to think very seriously. You will look at every day by counting. Oh my God, because it's very competitive, and you have to say, oh my, I have an exam to give in 2 days and 5 days, and you plan and all of that, and the other person is going to get even a half a mark or 1 mark more than you. Then your parents are going to compare you. So it's very now.
Yeah.
But there is a negative side to it, that it can be so overly stressful. And we, as a parent now, being here, I wouldn't want my kids to be in that level of a intense pressure cooker. So
Yeah.
I think there's a middle ground to that. But if you can survive that kind of a pressure cooker, you turn out to be a person that is not afraid to take on any challenges, and you actually love more and more and more challenges, which otherwise most people will say, oh my God, it's too much hard work, too much challenge, let's take it a little easy. So I would say that is the comparison I've found between me and my kids, with different schooling experience.
Great. Well, listen, Carl, I'm really grateful for your time today. It was a pretty wide-ranging conversation we had, which I think is illustrative of your breadth of interest and your amazing work. One last question: where can people find out about EdCast, and can people connect with you?
Oh, absolutely. Well, just connect with me over LinkedIn, and it's just edcast.com. Those are the two easiest way to get it, to connect with us.
And then maybe Code for India, is that, if
Yeah,
people get engaged in
absolutely.
that
You
program
can
too?
volunteer on codeforindia.org. So that's available. Absolutely.
Great. Well, thank you so much for your time, Carl.
Well, thank you, Chris, and you've always been a great inspiration for me for many, many years since I've known you, and you're doing fantastic work. So I really looking forward to continuously learning from you.
I thought the future would be cool.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Learning is the New Working. We absolutely love hearing from our listeners. We especially love feedback on existing shows, ideas for new topics and guests, and suggestions on how we can make the show more relevant. All feedback's most welcome here. And here's 3 ways that you can talk back, move the conversation forward, and influence the future of workplace learning. First, you can rate the show on your preferred podcast platform to help pluck us from relative obscurity and help other people find us. Second, you can sign up for our newsletter or leave comments on individual shows at our brand new podcast website, which is www.learningisthenewworking.org. And 3, you can share your favorite episodes with people in your professional network on social media. We'd like to thank all our participants, our season sponsors, and you, our listeners. And we'll see you next time on Learning is the New Working.
I thought the future would be cool.